I don't think there'll be a deal without, there may not be a deal at all, but I don't think there'll be a deal without some sort of American assurance to
Yes.
European nations
Yeah.
who don't have the capacity to deliver the sort of peace enforcement capability that might be needed.
Let's just listen back ahead of that meeting with Donald Trump on Thursday. There was a Keir Starmer today announcing those plans to increase defence spending.
We must find courage in our history, courage in who we are as a nation, because courage is what our own era now demands of us. So starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
And to fund that increase, the Prime Minister announced big cuts to international aid funding.
We will cut our spending on development assistance, moving from 0.5% of GNI today to 0.3% in 2027.
The Prime Minister went on to announce plans to boost spending for intelligence services, citing the threat of sophisticated attacks.
We also face enemies that are sophisticated in cyber attacks, sabotage, even assassination. And so our intelligence and security services are an increasingly vital part of protecting both us and our allies. So on top of the funding of 2.5% that I've just announced, going forward we will recognise the incredible contribution of our intelligence and security services to the defence of the nation, which means taken together we will be spending 2.6% on our defence from 2027.
And the Prime Minister went on to announce his commitment to further spending over the next decade.
I've long argued that in the face of ongoing generational challenges, all European allies must step up and do more for our own defence. So subject to economic and fiscal conditions and aligned with our strategic and operational needs, we will also set a clear ambition for defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament.
And these were big announcements. Let's first then get the thoughts of General Sir Peter Wall, a former Chief of the General Staff, head of the Army from 2010 to 2014. Welcome to you, Sir Peter.
Good evening, John.
Evening to you. Let me ask you first then for your thoughts on what you've heard.
Well, I think it's good news, but as far as it goes. It's added considerable certainty to defence as it enters its SDR coming out in the next few months. And, you know, the government has made clear choices, which is what it's paid to do. And I think that's a very good sign. But we're in the foothills of this issue.
Yeah.
And I suspect this uplift may not be sufficient to prevent capability cuts in the forthcoming defence review. And that's in the round as a consequence of protracted underinvestment in defence over the whole of the Tory era, starting in 2010, when significant cuts were taken across defence up to 20%, quite a lot of which, ironically, was, viewed from where we are now, was channeled into international aid. Over time, that has left our forces in a parlous state, I'm afraid. So this is a step in the right direction, but much more will be needed.
Right, well, you are very clearly not impressed. Can you just explain to us your thinking? When you say that we could still be in line for defence cuts, why do you say that? Why would that be?
Well, I'm not close to the numbers in the Strategic Defence Review, but I had heard from on the grapevine that the people doing that review were doing it against considerable uncertainty as to how much money would be afforded by the Treasury to defence in the current economic situation.
Yeah.
So what the Prime Minister has said has removed some of that uncertainty, but I suspect that such are the demands on defence expenditure against the backdrop of quite considerable inflation in recent years, following recent budgets that we all know about, and you've talked about a lot on your shows. There's a sort of backlog of problems that this isn't going to completely buy out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long history. I've covered so many of these stories over the years of defence budget money being wasted. Our history of efficient defence procurement is not good, is it? And then, of course, as you say, there's the rising cost of defending this country. It's fair to say a lot of people believe that you need this kind of money just to stand still. You think it could be worse than that?
I think that's a pretty good summary of where I'm at, and it may not quite be enough to prevent some capabilities being denuded in the short term, to allow money to be channeled into avenues that are seen in the light of the Ukrainian experience, for example, to have more potential longer term into for our deterrent posture, which is what this is really all about, is a return to deterrence. The end of the era of perpetually bleeding defence for a peace dividend, which started at the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, and it's going to need a further swing of the pendulum back in the other direction from a dividend to deterrence over time, in my view, particularly if America follows through on its threat to withdraw its capabilities from Europe under NATO, and in the face of their perceived priorities actual priorities in the Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister was talking earlier on that there could be some benefits to the British economy of this increase in defence spending. But it is a fact, isn't it? We spend a high proportion of our defence budget when it comes to procurement, not in this country. We spend a lot in America. And our defence industrial base, it can't cope with a huge increase in demand anyway, which suggests that a lot of the spending will not benefit Britain in the economic sense.
Well, I think that we need to think in longer time frames in the answer to that question. You're absolutely right that our productive capacities can significantly denuded as a consequence of what we've just discussed. Industry doesn't maintain capacity if there's no demand for it and there's no money flowing through. And so if we want to spend money quickly to change capability quickly, we may have to go offshore into Europe or across the pond into the former arsenal of democracy,
yes,
as it's been viewed for a long time. Part of this challenge in enhancing deterrence capability is to increase our defence industrial base to the point where we're spending money on these shores, employing British people with British skill sets, and that will generate growth in our economy. But we need considerable investment and not a little time to get onto that wave.
What do you say to those who argue that the cutting the aid budget as severely as this is also going to damage our security interests, that you are creating tensions and hostilities in poorer parts of the world where extremism can flourish, and to say nothing of China standing by, watching all of this, ready to fill the void and the vacuum in soft power too. That could count against us in security terms.
I think it could indirectly, but these are hard choices about deterrence now, not about how we use soft power. We've tried that. It's not working. I'm not saying that soft power doesn't have its place, but it needs to be underpinned by hard power. And we've pinned our hopes too much on soft power, and we need to restore that balance. And deterrence is ultimately down to a mixture of our national intent and our hard power capabilities and capacities. And we have let those slip over the years. We've been complacent, and we are now paying an ugly price to restore those to where they should have been all along. And had they been so, we might not be in this position. In fact, I strongly suspect we wouldn't. When I talk about intent, what did we do in 2007 when Russia invaded Georgia, Putin invaded Georgia? What did we do in 2014 when he invaded the Donbass and seized Crimea? We basically signaled a lack of concern that has encouraged him to go the extra step and go 3 years ago, the other day, into Ukraine, which is why we're talking about all of this.
All right, just the last one.
And it's to an extent, it's to our shame. It's to our shame that it's required an ally to stimulate us to do this, rather than working it out for ourselves and generating that will from within. Let's
Right.
hope we can now maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a point that's unarguable when you say that this package, this plan, the timing is with an eye to the Prime Minister's visit to Donald Trump on Thursday, where he's going to try and convince the president that Britain in Europe is doing its share, putting its own weight in terms of defence, and also trying to get America to provide some sort of guarantee, a defence guarantee in the background of a multinational European force that may be on the ground in Ukraine if there's a ceasefire. Do you think that this country could contribute to some sort of force on the ground in Ukraine if there's a ceasefire without that American backstop? Because the president has not promised that yet.
I think that looks a dubious proposition. In fact, I'm not entirely convinced that these American threats are going to flow through. I think that the penny will drop in Washington, if it's not already done so, that actually the risk to the United States goes up considerably if NATO becomes either weak or completely irrelevant. And without the American sort of nervous system and the American physical spine, NATO has an awful lot of investment to do to be able to replicate those capabilities. And it certainly can't withstand a gap of an immediate American withdrawal. There'd have to be a very long sort of finessing of that, so that Europe had time to do some sort of burden sharing arrangement to replicate what the Americans provide.
Right. So you'd expect America to, whatever Trump says now, to step up and give the historic guarantee to Europe when it comes to the defense against the likes of Russia. And what about that reassurance force in Ukraine? That would need an American guarantee, which we haven't yet heard, wouldn't it?
I don't think there'll be a deal without, there may not be a deal at all, but I don't think there'll be a deal without some sort of American assurance to European nations who don't have the capacity to deliver the sort of peace enforcement capability that might be needed. I mean, this is not going to be achieved by, people in UN equipment and so on. It could become, a serious potential conflagration. Because we're going to be played all the way by the Russians. Yeah. Every day they'll be testing us. They'll be putting awkward traps in our path, and it'll be very, very difficult not to lead to unintended consequences.
Right. So no American backstop, no force, European force, no European force, no ceasefire. General, great to talk to you. Thank you so much, General Sir Peter Wall. Now, let's look at things from the Ukrainian perspective. I can welcome to the programme Maria Mezetseva, the Ukrainian MP from Volodymyr Zelensky's party, is also head of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Maria, welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me. Good evening from Kiev.
Hi. First of all, you'll be aware of the announcement from the British Prime Minister earlier on increasing British defence spending. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is absolutely brilliant, very much expected. And I would like to say that by the end of yesterday's day of the commemoration of the third year of full-scale invasion, I felt 11th year of this brutal war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, we have seen a quite great figure, and it's 4.5 billion pounds from UK, but other partners are also joining the efforts. For instance, Denmark 270 million, Norway 3.5 million per year, so it's different dedications. Spain 1 billion per year, and Canada is giving us the training system for F-16. I've been in the system myself. I've seen how our pilots are trained. Yes. This is very, very important. And 20 armored vehicles. So basically, currently, can we say that this is the result of the wake-up call? Yeah. Is it the result of the new, new line of the negotiations on the side of the White House? Well, I think both, and this is a good result. Right. Could that be delivered earlier? Absolutely, yes. But one thing we should no doubtly have to consider is the increase of the expenditure of various member states of NATO. For instance, Finland and Sweden, being very new members, are spending more than very long-standing ones.
Okay, now so we're facing up to the reality of confronting the threat from Russia, and you're happy about that. Now, meanwhile, we're told by President Trump last night, we're told by Kyiv, by the Ukraine government, that you are close to agreeing a deal with Donald Trump's administration where America can get mineral rights in Ukraine. And in exchange for that, you want promises from America to defend Ukraine against Russia if there's a ceasefire.
Absolutely.
It hasn't been agreed yet. Do you think it will be?
Well, it should be. Let's be still positive on it. It was an initiative of President Zelensky presenting back in the beginning of this last autumn, 2024, in front of the national parliament and then in front of various partners, including, by the way, UK, US, and others. 5 points victory plan. One of the points was about critical minerals. But this deal is a two-sided deal, and one can't, be sure that it can be only one-sided. Therefore, it was very, I think, brave, courageous, and justified that President Zelensky with his team submitted amendments, unfortunately not accepted by the American team, but the deal is still on the ground. It's supported, the process is supported by the President Trump's team, our team in the President's office, and yes, we do know there was a sleepless night and it didn't bring the final result, but we are talking, friends, about the natural resources of our country. And this is not a deal for 10 days or 10 months. This is a very hard first to assess how and what do we have, so how it should be extracted, how it can be used. But this is a fair investment. And I think President Zelensky addressed this issue also to our partners across the globe. Everyone who can invest on a shared value and help Ukraine in such matter can do so. The conditions are important.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say then, you feel, that unless there is a deal that brings in American protection for Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire in exchange for those mineral rights, there will be no ceasefire. Everything depends on that.
Well, I'm coming from Kharkiv. This is a city with a population before the full-scale 2 million people, currently 1.3 million people. We're half an hour away from the border with Russia. Our region is, as I'm speaking to you right now, our region is being under attack of various drones and missiles. That means that we've been through this for a very long time. Longer it was for Donbass and Crimea, as it was told by the previous speaker. So I don't believe in a strict ceasefire, because we've been tricked on that many times. Meanwhile, when the Minsk I, Minsk II agreements were in place. So when we are hearing that U.S. partners, European partners, and us, we all want just and lasting peace, not a peace or, rearmament of Russia, giving them the time to rearm or recruit more Northern Koreans or get more support from Iran. We really mean a ceasefire, which wouldn't be breached. But for that purpose, where are the security guarantees? What would that be? Would that be the expenditure of our army? Currently, it's 800,000 personnel to 1 million, as President Zelensky said. Would that be extra sufficient military support? Would that be prosecution of the war crimes and setting up special tribunal for the crime of aggression committed? What are there for us? So it's not just, a simple deal we're going through.
A lot of negotiations still to be done.
Absolutely.
Maria?
And last but not least, friends, I want women to be involved in this negotiations. We want to see the humanitarian side of the things, because we talk about deported children, prisoners of war, civilians in captivity. All of them are being tortured daily by Russian authorities. We really need to sort these issues out.
I mean, you make the point very well. It is a complex picture. Maria Mezhitseva, Ukrainian MP there in Kyiv. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.